So let's start, guys. So this podcast is supported by the University of Oxford project, New Horizons for Science and Religion in Central and Eastern Europe. It's founded by John Templeton Foundation. Subgrant is the necessity of God's existence, divine names, and modality.
Yeah.
And the opinions expressed in this podcast are those of us and do not necessarily reflect the view of the John Templeton Foundation. So I will start with Mirko. Mirko, please introduce yourself.
Hello everyone, I don't know if it's the right way to introduce myself. I'm Mirko Zambrot, I'm a researcher at the Slovak Academy of Science and I am deputy PI of this research project. And Milos is the PI.
Milos, please introduce yourself as well.
As you can gather, my name is Milos. It's followed by Kostrec, and I'm also PhD. I work as a researcher, full-time researcher at the Institute of Philosophy of Slovak Academy of Science, VVI. For those interested in those, VVI is Public Research Information in Slovak, but it's kind of the full name. And I'm head of the analytic department there and also a principal investigator of this project, and I kind of try to lead it towards the good end. And can you tell us who you are?
Yeah, I actually forgot to introduce myself, right? So I'm Irakli Edi, a researcher in this project, and I try to organize all the good stuff, which are the lectures, podcasts, and also try to have some some impact on the world by publishing at least one paper which I plan to submit.
Okay, maybe
soon.
maybe we can touch on this difference between like what I internally call difference between, let's say, primary scientific results, as we are all researchers and paid by state to some extent, and let's say dissemination of our results to the public. Maybe also how this is connected to why we are doing this podcast. And you especially with your experience and also in what you do with your series of I don't know I think it's called small public lectures, which have now more than
Mini lectures, yeah.
mini lectures. But maybe you can introduce us between what is this, why are we doing this podcast? Why do you
Yeah,
think
we are. So basically, we are trying to share with the public the results of our project, what findings we have, and also try to somehow disseminate this information not only on the local level, but on an international level as well. And this is why we need to do this podcast, because I think podcasts are a pretty nice medium exactly for that. And well, as uh, I would simply now start and ask a question about project itself.
Okay.
And I don't know. I think Mirko, maybe you could start.
Yeah, just briefly background. This project is a project in analytic philosophy, of course, analytic philosophy, and it stems from a previous project that we carry out in the previous years. And the topic of the other research project was epistemology, metaphysics, and logic of fictional name. And so, as philosopher, we are interested in existence. What existence mean? What existence are? What exist? That is very old and most old question ever. And as analytic philosopher, we try to address this question from an analytic perspective. It means that asking what exists is mainly asking what existence means. What existence means. And so analyzing from the semantic and syntactic perspective what the role of these terms, of this concept, and how it's related to other component of sentence, like the primary component of sentence, like names, proper names, and predicates, right? And we were fascinating about fictional names because fictional names create a lot of tricky problems for this kind of perspective. And this leads us to investigate the role of the terms or the concept God in respect to this kind of question, because God doesn't, the point with fictional name that they don't look like predicate, they look like proper names, but in the end it's difficult to give an account of fictional names in terms of proper name if you apply to them the predicate or whatever it is existent. And this again leads us to investigate what's the role of the concept God in this kind of question, as God again doesn't look like a predicate, but at the same time, so it doesn't look like a proper name and an individual. Proper name I means a term that refers to an individual, right? And but still, if we consider them it as a proper name or he as a proper name, it leads us to some tricky conclusion. So our investigation to focus on, of course, the concept of existence, given our background to our question asking what existence means, and then how it's related to this kind of name or predicate of the syntactical category that is God, to give us a meaningful sentence, as the sentence God exists seems like to be meaningful. But apart from that, we add other operator that is necessity, that is called intentional operator. So that also it's very tricky and studied concept in philosophy, analytic philosophy, and we try again to see how this concept of this function apply to the sentence God exists, and how it changed the meaning, if it changed the meaning of the role, what's the role of this function in the entire sentence. Why we asking this? Because usually when we ask people, believers, theists or also atheists, if they believe in God, what they believe is not just the exist. What their usual reply is not just they believe in the existence of God; they believe in the necessity of God's existence. And we try to investigate what does it mean. Apart from the theological implication of this research, from our perspective, the most interesting point is to develop a framework to understand how all these notions that are pivotal in the philosophical investigation and analytic realm works, to better understand how they work. So which concept, which terms, which function, this existence, that is the most discussed concept ever, and also necessity or possibility, and again the relation between proper names and predicate and other syntactical category of language.
That was a lot.
That was a lot. Milos, would you like to add something to this?
Add, maybe mix something to maybe clarify, or maybe maybe to confuse more, you know?
Yeah. Why not?
Let me touch on a few things. Like you said that it's true, like the department we work on has a history of working in analysis of fictional contexts. What is the meaning of them? What's their logic? What's the truth value of any? What does it mean if somebody says that this or that happened in fiction is true? These questions get really tricky really quickly, and we can touch on this if we find it relevant. But from those investigations, it was really close to the questions like, okay, if somebody is worried about the meaning of sentences, like Sherlock Holmes is a detective, or he necessarily has to be a detective, or it can't be that somebody is Sherlock Holmes and he's a detective, and alike. Like this seems to be really close, at least in form, to statements concerning God or March. God is one of them. Statements concerning broader terms like Zeus or Hera or Vishnu or you name it. Like God, from this point of view, God is just one example of many different names which we Put under an umbrella, we call them divine names, because first they kind of connect to some divinity in broad context. We don't want to focus on one religion before the other. So these they have in common. They use statements with the divine names, and names because this is the closest to what the name seems to be working like. There are other possibilities. Mirko mentioned predicates, whatever that is. Maybe we can touch on that. What's a
Yeah.
predicate or
Yeah,
not?
actually, it's
absolutely.
very important. You should try to
But
touch on it.
but people kind of know or have a feel about what's the name. My name is Milos. We introduce us by our names. Not that somebody will know what's Milos Kostrec, but they know that it refers to me. So it's my name, and it seems that those divine names like God, Vishnu, or and so on seems to be working like this. At least let it put this like if you look at it naively, without negative connotations. Like if we look at it as we use it, or people tend to use it, or fiction tend to use them, they seem to behave like a name, and it's already a big discussion whether they are actually a names. So that's why we were looking in the fictional context, and these contexts were really close. Maybe with some correction. I'm not that sure that people will submit, and or actually a lot of people will not submit to the idea that that those contexts in which divine names are used are fictional.
Yeah,
For example, the pastor during his sermon wouldn't subscribe that he is doing a piece of fiction. I would say the Urbi et Orbi of Pope is not the theater. He tends to do some. He provides to present some, let's say, serious stuff, whatever that means. So, for some atheists, probably it can be one of the ways to look upon these things is usable fiction. But for some others, no. And this is one of the more interesting idea, the which brings to questions like how can atheists, theists, or agnostics even discuss with each other.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like for me personally, the core problem was either I would claim that these people, when are discussing or claiming something containing divine names, don't understand each other at all, and they are just missing each other's points, which is kind of trivial and non-interesting way to put it.
Yeah.
And I personally don't feel like that's the case. I think that I can at least understand something when I'm speaking with a theist or atheist, and these two can have informed, relevant, logical discussion about it. And our project would like to shed some light on how is this possible, because the obvious answer, easy from the street, could be like they don't understand each other. And
Yeah, which I don't think is the case. They definitely understand each other. Before we jump to predicates, I would like to know how divine names or names of the divine beings are connected with the with names of mythical like creatures, like for example
okay,
Pegasus, unicorn, because these are also a fictional names.
democracy.
Democracy, maybe.
There are three different kind of.
Yeah, just make it broader.
Yeah, why not democracy? Okay, and how are they connected to these concepts, and also why do we differentiate between them if we do?
Like, that's a good question. I actually tried to touch on that, but I didn't use the word mythical. Like, that's another context. Like, what we do as practicing analytic philosopher is you have to take into consideration the contexts in which a word or label or language or idea or argument is used.
At least if you are pragmatist.
So yeah, so we spoke about fictional contexts, which are naively context within a fiction, like when Sherlock meets Watson and discuss with him something that's context within the fiction. And as you say, mythical context seems to differ, at least in some cases. For example, people could agree that mythical context, or what is said in them, at least in the past, was taken to be true at face value. The people did those eposes concerning gods were understood as literally saying something about the world, which can't be the case. For example, when you read Animal Farm or something like that, you get it, you read it, and you know it's a fiction. You have at least different standpoint towards when you are receiving it. So there seems to be at least this historical difference between mythical and fictional context, and still, again, to return to Sandy Pastor who is speaking, he wouldn't say, or she, for the matter, that he's presenting myths. So there is yet another, I don't know, call it religious context or context of religious practices, because I can use it this way. And they would say there's a difference even between their fiction and myths. So myths is kind of strange one because it seems to be in the middle between these. Like it's kind of hard to have somebody who would agree, what I'm doing is mythical work. No, people would say, okay, that was a myth then, now we don't believe anymore, etc.
Yeah.
So, but the case is that divine names, for lack of a better term, at the moment, it seems to play a role in each of these contexts. Like, for some people, it seems to be meaningful at face value. For some people, it seems to be meaningful only within some myths. For some people, actually, seems to be a position of some polite atheists. It's just a piece in a game of some activities of some people on Sunday, and for some, it's a piece of fiction. So. When you speak and discuss and try to disentangle all the problems connected to it, especially when you take necessities into consideration, you shall see which kind of context you are investigating. I don't know if this helped you.
Well, it did. I'm just more interested in why can we, or actually why cannot we compare the divine names with the name like unicorn or Pegasus?
That's actually quite interesting. Like I can dig deeper here, but
we can.
maybe
Maybe we can.
We should definitely.
First, I will clear my nose.
Okay, I can give some hints. But this goes. Okay, some brief background to understand why they are different, if they are. And first of all, as Milos clarified, one of the main aim of this project is to understand, to shed light what people are disagreeing about, when disagreeing about the existence of God, right, between atheists and theists. And so let's suppose me and you are a theist, I'm an atheist, and you say God exists, and say God doesn't exist. If God, we take God to be a proper name, this disagreement doesn't have any sense at all. Why? Because the term that looks like a predicate, but as I will say, it's not at all, exist, doesn't apply to proper name. If you say that a proper name like Milos or Heracles exists, it's totally trivial, or it's tautology, or it's not informative at all. Why? Because proper names are just referring device that already imply or presuppose the existence of the entity. Yes, so if I say Milos exists, I say something totally not informed, not meaningless, something trivial. So and
it depends.
Okay, from some perspective, some background. I just give some hints where I want to go to show. If you say, on the other hand, if you say Milos doesn't exist, it's a contradiction, so also is meaningless. According to this position, that actually is not mine, and also is not the only one, but it's the most, I would say, maybe don't try,
You
the
can call it
most
orthodox.
the most orthodox in analytic philosophy that comes from Kant at least, but also the champion is Frege, of course, but it's endorsed for the majority of main philosophers in the past century. Also, Quine, I would say, that endorsed this kind of thesis. The thesis that exists is not a predicate at all that apply to individuals, but it's another, it's what you say, second order predicable, sorry, that apply to predicable. What's a predicable? It's terms that can play the function of predicate. What's the terms can play the function of predicate? It's a description or a or a property, a description, sorry, that refer or denote a property or equalities. So in the end, exist is not a proper predicate because it doesn't denote any properties, any qualities, but it's a second order predicable that define somehow apply to other concepts. So is it that clear?
So in layman terms, probably.
Okay, no, just a follow up. So it, in very nutshell, it means that the predicate, the predicable that we are talking about, is not empty. Yeah. And when I say, for that reason, I cannot apply to name, but I can apply to concept. For instance, tigers. Tigers exist. It means that the concept tiger, it is not empty. So there is some individual that have this property to be a tiger.
Yes. So now...
Yeah, this was just a small background to go there.
You want to continue? Because I want to...
Maybe just... put it from the clouds on the street is that when you speak about predicate, it's just nothing else like to predicate something to something is to say that something is, for example, green. Or
yeah, it's a property.
Yeah, it's a property. So when you say that something is a predicate, it's just a technical word for a property you ascribe to something.
It's not totally correct.
I know. We can go into the details of it, but let's give you a starting point to that.
Sure.
So it's a kind of property, and then you can ask, okay, property of something, because it seems to be a good idea not to put all existing X, for lack of better to the same basket. So we kind of differentiate things. We have people, we have things, we have, let's say, animals, we have other stuff. And not all properties we can ascribe to one can we ascribe to the other. Like it doesn't have proper sense to say that this table is wise or intelligent yet, if it's not this kind of technology. And it's the same with philosophers. Look at the predicate existence to be existing, and it seems the tradition Mirko was trying to present. People try to say that it's not really meaningful to ascribe this property like be existing or not existing to individuals like people for simplification. So, but that's it. Property predicate in the first approximation, just a property you ascribe to, and now different kind of things.
Yeah, that goes to the next part of your question. So, if God, if exist, is not a predicate, actually, to my opinion, doesn't express any property at all, and it's a play different function. But anyway, if I apply to concept, so and apply meaningful to God, means that God is not a proper name, but it's a concept, and it's already a kind of result. But so a result, a concept like tiger or whatever, and to exist, it means that the concept God is instantiated. So there is one at least one individual that have the property of be God. Now there are two interesting questions. First of all, if it's God, it's the unique God. There are no tigers, for instance, tigers, they could be several, but God is not. So the first question is, the first point is God is if it's a concept that apply not to many or some individual, but just to one specific individual.
It also depends, but go on.
Okay, if it's the case, or at least some monotheistic, of course, religion. That's what I wanted. That's right.
Of course.
That's fair.
I mean, okay, so God doesn't denote individual, because if it would have denoted individual, then the stuff like, I don't know, exists, or he's benevolent or wise or
Benevolent,
something,
yes.
this would make like sense. So what does it denote? Does it denote something to be?
No,
Like,
it's not denoting any property. It's a property of concept. So it's a property of property. It is roughly means that the concept has an extension. Here, just a technical background. Concept, tradition in philosophy, as defined having two features. One is the extension, so the individual to which this concept apply, and intension. Intention can understand very roughly as the meaning, have some meaning. If a concept has an intention, so has a meaning, doesn't imply necessarily that it has some extension, individual that apply to it. And if, of course, if I have some individual apply to it, has also some intention. So we can talk about concept from two different perspectives. If you apply this concept, you can talk about the individual, that it belongs to this sets of property that fall under this concept as the extension, so it's instantiated by the extension. Or we can talk about its intention, so its meaning. A clear example could be a role, a social role, like being a dean of the faculty of philosophy. If I say that the dean of the faculty of philosophy exists, I'll say that the property of being the dean of the department is instantiated. So there is an individual that has this property, that play this role. But also I can talk about the intention itself. And I say the concept or the role, the dean of the department exists. And in this case, I mean that the terms, the concept, the role, dean of the department is meaningful.
We have the notion, we can speak about it, analyze what would it mean for something to be it at the moment. So
exactly.
It's
so something to be like. So then we are saying that God denotes some kind of individual office.
If exists.
If exists.
Okay, this is the starting point. Okay.
I don't know if it's starting point, but it's one of the point on one of the routes we have taken.
Mm-hmm.
Like definitely this is not the sole position that can be there. It's one of the position if you have some assumptions which are really philosophically relevant, but and connected, but which we weren't provided yet. But it's not like, of course, God is a role or whatever. But it seems to be one of the way out of the problems you have when you try to understand when somebody says God doesn't exist.
Exactly.
Because okay, when you have God exists, whatever divine names or some other divine name you are using, this doesn't seem to be that problematic. Like nobody is hurt from that, like at least mentally. But when somebody then comes and says God doesn't exist, then how can this be? Like, because if it doesn't exist, what are you speaking about? Then it seems to be like, what's the difference between saying God doesn't exist and doesn't exist? Because then it seems to be really close to nonsensical word. And if it's not nonsensical, so if you are trying to say something meaningful, because first your statements shall be meaningful, only then we can evaluate whether they are true or false. Or none of the matter. Because if I don't understand what you're saying, I cannot look for whether it's true or false. So if you want to tell to me something which you mean and you want to say something true by God doesn't exist, how do you manage that? So that's like the starting point, and which one of the roots come to say, okay, to be able to say this, God probably does. It's not good to say that God is an individual or one thing, because then it seems really contradictory or at least paradoxical, and we can go towards why to deny the property of existence. It seems to be you have to at least assume. In any case, Pavel Tichý, who provided one of the frameworks we try to develop the research tried to put forward an argument that this has to be so, like in line with Frege's and Kant, like existence. He didn't deny it as a property of ascribable to individuals. He just wanted to say it's not. If it's so, it's trivial because we cannot consider individual as non-existing. It doesn't make sense to him, and he tried to argue to this position too somehow. So the other possibility is okay. What's other things we are describing existence to? And it's like okay, he didn't have to go far because one of the most famous discussion in analytic philosophy in 20th century was about the French king, which we kind of know that at least in 20th century no such individual was. Nevertheless, hundreds of papers are still being written about this. So that means to say that French king doesn't exist, we are relevantly and non-trivially say something which can change in truth value over time by using the French king. So what then? What are we applying this predicate? Because it seems like we are describing some property to something. It seems okay. The French king, if something to make it shorter, it seems like a position that can be filled or need not be filled. And the technical term, at least used by Tichý and also by other people, it's to call it office.
Yes,
individual office.
Great point, because next thing I wanted to say, so basically office of French king is not occupied right now, but the question if God exists is legitimate question in case if we understand God as an office, like God office or something like this, because we are basically asking whether or not the God office is occupied.
Yeah, if you make this move, or if you at least try to understand the discussion between, let's say, atheists and agnostics and theists in this way, then you have at least the first move. You are not claiming that they are talking past each other, like at least one of them is speaking nonsense, but there's a common way to look on statements of all of them. We can model them, and as a disagreement about okay, if we look at the God, or in broader terms, in the meaning of divine names as to be standing for some kind of office, whichever it is, then they can productively engage in discussion about whether it's occupied or not. And then you can just describe the difference in understanding. Okay, they are actually speaking about the same stuff. If they are speaking about the position, and they will say, yeah, it exists, atheists say, no, it doesn't. Agnostic would say, I don't know. And there are further positions in this. So that's at least this data is the first. It's at least some data for usability to think about God this way, or divine names.
To put it, in the different words, the question God exists, or the disagreement between atheists and theists about the existence of God, can be somehow ambiguous.
Yeah.
Maybe ambiguous from pragmatic perspective or semantic perspective. I don't want to enter in this debate, but can be ambiguous at least in three readings. One, if the individual exists, but as we say, the individual, so the God understood as a proper name exists, is somehow or nonsensical or controversial or trivial. So doesn't sound a good understanding of this sentence. The second reading is, as you say, as a concept or as a role, as a office, call it whatever you like, a property, quality that is occupied or not. So the atheists say that is a role that is not occupied, like the King of France, and the theists say that it's a role, office, that is occupied, like the dean of the department.
Yeah.
But then there is also a third reading, that is the concept of the role or the office God exists. In this third reading, what you are talking about, we are not talking about the extension of the concept of if the concept is occupied or not, but if you're talking about the intention. So it's the concept, the role of God is just a name of an intention, and we are talking about if this intention exists or not. So what does it mean? If this intention, this concept is meaningful or not.
Yeah.
And of course, theists and atheists could agree, atheists and theists, could agree that the concept of God exists, even though the theists say that it's occupied and the atheists say that it's not occupied. Like saying the kings of France exist as a concept, as a role. One say actually it doesn't exist, but let's say the dean of the department exists. One say, of course, exists because there is, I don't know, a regulation, a social structure that ground these practices, and we can investigate if indeed there is someone occupy this role. And can be the case, for instance, Miloš is gonna
Be the god? No.
no, I don't know, he's gonna resign, and of course for a few days before the election there will be no dean of the department. But we doesn't exist any dean of the department. I just mean that this role right now is not occupied, but the role itself exists. Yes. Another interesting question now that can move to the intentional part. So they mean God the necessary exists.
Because on the roll.
What?
You are on the roll. Come on, yeah, go.
No,
on.
The question then we say, okay, we can agree that God exists as a concept, as a role, or whatever you like. But then the theists say, wait a minute, we agree, but the concept of God or the role of God exists necessarily. And the interesting question now to ask, the atheist could agree on this, like before, the existence of the concept not, or it's impossible to them to accept this sentence without resign for being an atheist.
Mm-hmm. Okay, this is very interesting, and what I had on mind that started to slip away.
I think that this it's interesting that we are kind of still answering for maybe 20 minutes or half an hour. The question was the difference between Pegasus.
Yeah, we are getting closer.
We are because it could look like we move away, but not. We actually really right on that.
Yes.
And maybe I'm not entirely agree with what Mirko says, but because okay, we are scientists, we can practically disagree. We are scientists, oh man.
That's too much.
But if some, as I said, it's about the context. So if you know that if you speak, if you say French king doesn't exist or God doesn't exist or God exists, and French king does.
I remembered what I wanted to say. Sorry.
So, glad to help. That if you now add this another spice of necessity into it, which is what was the core of the project, of this project we are doing now, you have to still have in mind, are you speaking about the concept or its extension or its denotation or whatever? And we can, if we are speaking about necessity, we can like go on. If we are again return to the basic data to explain the disagreement between theist, atheist, agnostics. If somebody puts forward a claim, God exists and necessarily so, what is it that they claim about? Because the relevancy and non-triviality or the level of controversy connected to the debate kind of differs in the context we can follow.
Yes, and now when you are saying the necessity of God's existence, how can we turn this sentence like necessity of the King of France existence? Like, can we?
It's demonstrably false.
Well, yes, and now are we saying that at least once the God existed as a king of France existed, or that it will exist if it is a concept that is still not occupied but might be occupied somewhere in the future? And now
this is interesting, but at least we, as you can see yourself now, if you look at it from this role position way, now we have at least a tool to put the question in more particular way. It's not more about the existence of God, but existence of God as a concept, as the God as a role, whatever that is, or existence of the actual, for lack of a better word, the God. And if we are discussing necessity, like the sister of necessity, other term is possibility. Like for some, you can try to pragmatically and productively describe this disagreement or discussion between atheist and theist as being a really disagreement about this claim about the modality of concept. For example, somebody could claim that okay, God existed not anymore. God is dead. It seems to be a presupposition of dying, that you have to be alive before, just to put it in a street view again. And someone say, no, God always existed. As long as there's time, there's a God, or even there is a God even before time, whatever that means. So you can try to productively engage in analysis of the logics behind those arguments as being about the modalities. That's how we call these terms, these predicates, being possible, being necessary. And they can disagree. And now, if they can, it's connected to the word. If being possible and being necessary is a property we can ascribe to something, then how does it work if we ascribe it to a thing or office? What's a necessary office? What's a possible office? And on the other side of this, the same hand, what is impossible office? So these are connected, and these are the discussion the projects try to engage in.
So yeah, so far we are not even touched the project, because the project will start from this point. I will say somehow.
Please.
And if we are discussing about what does it mean that God understood in this way exists necessarily, possible, or people that disagree about this sentence, exactly what does it mean? And according to a standard view, at least in analytic philosophy, and then also that comes from Tichý, at least we discuss a lot from Tichý, that it's another project we run in a few years ago. To exist, to do something from necessary, to have some property necessarily, means that this role, this concept is occupying any possible world. Again, just a few background definition. When we are talking about possibility, we are talking metaphysical possibility, not temporal possibility or epistemic possibility. So it's possible epistemologically, from the epistemological point of view, that I don't know if God exists, but this is not our point. The point is, if it exists necessary, so in any possible world, even though I cannot know about that. And if doesn't exist, or if something doesn't have a property X in this world, means that it doesn't have, not temporary, that it doesn't have now but could have tomorrow. But it's in this world, not in this actual world, it doesn't happen that this entity has this property. But it could have an individual X could have this property in another possible world. This possible is a technical notion.
Yes, of course. But doesn't the necessity of existence means that it should be occupied in all of the possible
Exactly.
worlds?
This,
Yeah.
according
It
to
depends.
Reading, yeah,
It
according
depends.
to our reading, it means, at least the Tichý reading, exists necessary. If you are talking about extension, means that this extension of the concept God is occupied in any possible world, right? So, and of course, again, people could disagree. Atheists and theists say, I disagree that God exists in any possible world. Of course, because I disagree that it doesn't exist in this. It doesn't. This concept is not instantiated in this actual world, so it cannot be instantiated in any possible world. This is a triviality that follow. But that's not the interesting debate. The interesting debate is, say, the intention, again, the concept of the role God exists in the actual world, actually, but one could say it doesn't exist necessarily, could exist in another possible world. The question is, makes sense, this move? Makes sense to say that a concept that doesn't exist in this actual world exist in other possible world.
This is quite nice box, not Pandora's box, but this is really, you are opening something now.
Yeah, that's actually, these goals are to make the comparison between fictional entities and God.
Maybe can I ask you, because
Sure.
because I was speaking about the modalities of languages here, because if you're speaking like there's a possible world in which the concept God, whatever you mean by it, doesn't exist. That it can't be a concept of the language upon which
No.
I'm building the possible worlds. So it must be a language within those worlds.
No, I'm not talking about language.
Okay, so what do you talk?
In the Frege sense, concept is something like abstract object, like numbers or whatever. That is not necessarily connected with language. Of course, you use language to express the concept, but concept could exist, if they exist, independently of language.
Okay, let me spin it. The question was then, I can say something non-trivial like God is not necessary, and my meant by this, it's quite possible to think about the possible world, which is a world which we can think of. Let's put it this way: situations we can think of, in which there are speakers, people, who don't have a language that will refer to God in any way. Like for example, even if I'm a believer, then there was no term for God maybe in the dark prehistory. There were humans,
Yeah.
but no language even. Like it's kind of agreed that human species is older than language. Maybe it's not. But if we assume this, then it's possible to say that the concept is not necessary, at least in this way, and it's non-trivial, but maybe non-interesting point.
Yeah, but just a follow up. There is this traditional confusion about the concept of concept. There is a psychological reading of concept that like mental state or mental picture, and then there is not a psychological reading of concept. That is, again, meaning, content of thought, content of not thoughts itself, content of thoughts that could be independent of any language or anyone thinking of these thoughts.
Yes.
And this is not psychological reading, that is reading from Frege, because you're reading from Frege, that is the father of any philosophy, just to mention. But of course, there is a psychological reading that was one of the most traditional reading in the past. Maybe Hume had this idea of concept when he talked about ideas, that concepts are just mental imagery or mental states or mental picture, whatever. That of course depend of mental state, depends of the mental activity of language of a human being. Without human being, there would be not concept in this psychological sense. But in the most interesting way, you can understand concepts in not psychological terms. And question again is, if in this not psychological way, the concept of God exists necessarily in any possible world, and if not, it's possible to have could not exist, of course, will not exist the concept. Of course, the people that the atheists could endorse the thesis that this concept exists in our actual world but could not exist. And atheists, on the other way around, say that no, this concept exists in any world. What does it mean? And this connect, if you want to go further, to fictional world, because fictional world, as we understood, at least some researcher of our research group understood fictional terms, works exactly in this way, to say that a fictional concept doesn't exist, it's empty. It means that it's empty necessarily in any possible world. So there is no individual in any world.
Like it's the mark. He's speaking about fictional characters. Like fictional concepts. Maybe that's too broad.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, my mistake. Fictional.
Yeah, but fictional characters like their defining property is that they are necessarily not existing. Like you can't. Even if you met guy who looked like James Bond, did stuff like James Bond, it doesn't mean that the author was writing about dead man. Like this seems to be, I think it's even Kripkean argument.
73 book.
Like so, that's not even a coincidence. Like necessarily, Kripke, if the outer worlds of fiction, he is not writing about those people.
So it's a concept. The fictional character Sherlock Holmes, that if it's a concept, is necessarily empty. So, and if it's necessarily empty, then the question is what we are talking about when we are talking about intention. And again, the first step is to say, if we want to talk about the extension of this individual, this concept that are individual that cannot exist in any possible world, some people start to talking about impossible world. So people that exist not in possible world but impossible world, and this is the route that some colleague of us took.
Yeah, that's one popular move.
And again, so someone disagreeing on this could endorse the thesis, some atheists could endorse the thesis that in the end God behaved like this fictional character concept of fictional character. They are necessarily empty, and in this case, talk about God will be something like talking about an impossible entity, and of course maybe not or fixed or impossible. And what's an impossible entity? Like the round square. Round square, it's a contradiction. So if you wanna talk about these the entities,
So very interesting. Just round square. Yeah.
If you want to talk about round square, you cannot make any meaningful sentence with this concept because nothing it's under this intention.
It depends.
Yes, you can make a meaningful sentence just in what is called counterpossible sentence or counterpossible talking about impossible words, so in counterpossible sentence. The same happened with the fictional character. If they are somehow impossible entities, you can talk about meaningfully about fictional character just in hyper-intentional context, like the context created by propositional attitude, like imagining, believing, or some construction of believing, pretending, and so on. But in the first order sentence, and also in the intentional sentence, like modal sentence, you cannot make any meaningful sentence with this word. The point is, atheist, also the most radical atheist, will be skeptical, or maybe not. Maybe some atheists will be skeptical to endorse this thesis.
Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to ask about the difference in approaches that you two are taking when working on this project, basically, and if it is somehow explainable in a user-friendly way, with non-very without the terrible technical language or
Techniques made life better, so don't be afraid of it.
I'm just hoping that whoever will be listening to this, they will enjoy this podcast till the end, and if we will put in some technicalities, it might.
Like this will be having an end, so I will have to make myself shorter then.
Well.
I suggest maybe, we already touched on the properties of or features of framework of Tichý, roles, etc. We kind of discussed it a bit, not in great depth. But as you rightly mentioned, like the project is multi-dimensional or multimodal. This is not the only way we investigate. And the other line of investigation is expressivism. And I would let our deputy PI to tell us something more about that.
Just from where we ended in the last sentence. We ended with this. We are trying again to understand what's the disagreement between atheist and theist, and if some atheists disagree that there is not the concept of God necessarily, then we have two different solutions. Or we are extreme in the sense that we reject that there is the concept of God, and so we end up in this kind of impossible world stuff that you can do that, but maybe it's very also tricky and problematic to go so further. But also you can accept that the concept exists, the atheist again, accept the context exists, but is not necessary. And so it doesn't exist, it doesn't, the concept exists in this world but is not occupied. But the point is, makes sense to talk about the concept of God that is not occupied. It makes sense to talk about a role that is not occupied if we are talking about social role, like role of president of US,
Yes.
whatever. That are social construction, right? And of course, social construction could be a contingent, could not exist without a society of human beings.
Yeah.
And then there are natural kinds, or natural kinds, that express necessary features of individual or actual individual. And these concepts are necessarily, by definition, occupied. And so the question is, if the concept of God is not a social construction, of course you can endorse this. And there are atheists that say it is social construction. Maybe you agree on this. But if you don't say that the concept of God is not a social construction, then you have to endorse the thesis is a natural kind. But if it's thesis is natural kind,
that's a false dilemma, man.
Okay, no, just I'm going there. If it's natural kind, then it's necessary to occupy. So you have to agree that God exists in this world. Or you can say, but also this is problematic because the concept of God imply as a features, as a requisite, some concept like almighty or like etern or atemporal or I don't know. Omnipotent, that are not really so scientific concept. But of course, so maybe you want to reject the thesis that the concept of God is a natural concept. But then what's the solution? If it's not a social concept, then it's not a natural concept.
I see where you're
going. Then what kind of concept it is? You can say that it is a concept of concept, like numbers. But this doesn't work either because concept of concept apply to concept. Instead, concept of God apply to apply to individual, like property to be almighty is not a property of concept. It's a property of individual if it exists.
Or some rock music.
Of some rock music. So also you can say that it's a so I don't know, but there are other solutions, but also they are not that happy. So we are facing with a dilemma. Or you say that the concept of God is instantiated, so the God exists, or you have to explain which kind of content this is. That is not really the point. My solution, it is not my proposal, is not, and this is from the standard point of view of any philosophy that talk about possible world, right? Modality in terms of possible. My point, or not mine, the point that I want to investigate on, is to offer an expressivist analysis. Expressivist analysis has an thesis according to which a modal concept or high order concept or function that create proposition to other proposition or second order concept like exist or other concept that doesn't apply to individual, apply to concept, play an expressive role. What does it mean, expressive role? That express some features of the concept itself to which it applies. So, for instance, the concept of existence just show that the predicate, the predicable to which it applies, it's a predicable.
Yeah.
If it's the concept of modality, like necessarily, show that the necessarily connection, inferential connection between that made up the content of this concept. For instance, to say that the chopper is melt at 100 degrees, that is false. Let's say the chopper conduct electricity.
You mean copper?
Copper.
No,
Copper. Sorry,
okay.
The metal.
I was thinking the chopper.
No, sorry, copper.
Let's get back to the chopper,
No, you're my mistake.
Get to the chopper.
I'm getting tired. Sorry. The copper. So if the copper conducts electricity, and you say necessarily that it is, you display some features of the concept, the relation between the concept copper and the concept electricity. And what you are showing are inferential connection between these two concepts. And so these kind of terms, modal terms, show features of the concept itself.
Yeah.
And these features are inferential features, so let's not go on into detail about this. And So you don't need to talk about word, possible word, impossible word. It's just different way to approach this question. So when you say that the concept of God exists necessary, you just say that this concept should be endorsed. What does it mean that should be endorsed? That you cannot be a meaningful language user, or you cannot think either. You cannot have any conceptual framework without using this kind of concept, because it forms the background, the scaffolding upon which all the other concept or any other truths and falsity can be built on.
It's
okay.
kind of normative, like a game building. Or
Exactly,
like
normative is very interesting notion, because when I say when showing the necessity show feature inferential feature of the concept, just not showing is not just reporting or describing these inferential features, is endorsing the validity of these inferential. So you push some normative force on this act and say that this inferential connection is the right one. So you are committing on this the goodness of this inferential connection.
laying down the rule.
Yeah, at the same time apply to God exists. The concept God exists, you say that the concept of God which necessarily should be applied in order to have a conceptual framework as a conceptual framework.
Okay. This is.
And of course, you can atheist and theist could disagree about that.
But then their disagreement is conceptual in matter. So they are you are kind of returning to they are speaking behind.
No, it's not a verbal dispute. That's an interesting point, because also I thought about a lot about that, because it's not verbal dispute, because a verbal dispute is just they are talking about past each other.
Yeah.
But instead, if you are talking normatively, you should say you are talking about what you should do, and this is not talking past each other. What you should, if you should endorse this concept, then this conceptual framework or not. And it's not talking past each other. If it's like discussing if it's morally correct to eat apple during the podcast.
If it's apple of knowledge,
I don't know about morality of that. It's a very
no moral, because moral
issue.
system, moral concept are usually
about
typical normative concept.
if it is immoral to eat apple
immoral.
during the podcast or not.
it depends.
I don't know.
Again, I like this word.
But and what is your beef with the expressivist approach?
Beef is maybe a strong word. I kind of tried to put my point by the last question is like, if I look at this, or this may be more a beef with inferentialists in general, but it seems to be, or late with Gestein to just drop another names, is that them seem to be explaining the meaning, whatever that it means, of a term by the role it plays in bigger structure, which can be done, can be analyzed. But still, if you even when you are making, for example, big data analysis of network connections between, like linguistically, you still need to have these nodes. You are not saying you have to first have the nodes, and then you reveal something about the nodes by saying how they are connected. Like, for example, sex and porn are connected, and I don't know, love and hate are connected, etc., etc. You can make this connection. It's one step further for me is that those connections is all that matters. Like you kind of, again, Gesteinly, you have a ladder and then you throw it away. No, I hate. No, you still have to have these nodes. And with expressivism, I have this same beef, if you want to put it this way, is that if they want to say that they are making the rules for something, and the rules are all there is to that something, then how come somebody can disagree with it? How come there be a disagreement? Then the only disagreement there is like disagreement, like if we two don't agree about how the king shall move in a chess. That's not descriptive disagreement, it's just normative. You just want to play the game differently than me.
Yeah.
You want to play other game. And if you look at it from this point of view, it doesn't seem to me that it pays enough respect, or put it the other way, explains the data about the descriptive disagreement. Like it's not saying that these people are speaking past each other, but it's kind of puts the core of the disagreement on different ground than I think it is. Like I don't think that when atheists and theists disagree about the existence of God, they are disagreeing about the rules of a game. I would say that either because then they can in the end agree that we can both play the same game. But I think that if there is a disagreement, one of them is thinking then the other is wrong. And how can you be wrong about your game?
Wow.
Like
Okay.
that's my and you know it then it all depends on the detail how you know that this kraken of argument is coming, and you if you want still present this idea, and people do in the numbers, then you have to kind of circle around it, or at least address it. So if you present the point and you're trying to resolve some problems you want to explicate, I'm there in the background with this hammer, and will try to use it to your theory. That's just my beef.
Like, no, I agree that this is the problem. The problem exactly was that in the past, from centuries, this kind of debate, the God existence model, not this one, is understood as a factual debate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. That can be solved according to appealing to some facts in the world. But this kind of analysis, the kind of analysis that we also explained before, leads to it's a never-ending story, and
Yeah.
leaves no explanation, and also doesn't shed any lights for centuries. Maybe I don't say that this is the right route to take, but maybe to see the disagreement from a different perspective, not as a factual disagreement, but it's a different kind of disagreement, maybe a normative disagreement, could be a way to shed light what is going on over there, and why it's so persistent. And because if it's just a factual disagreement, characteristics of factual disagreement, they disappear once you show facts on the table, put facts on the table.
An optimist.
Okay, sometimes.
Well,
So in principle can be solved. And the question why is not solved so far. But of course you can say that it's a difficult problem, or also the question is how to factually solve this kind of disputes. It could be an physical, empirical investigation to discover God. I don't think so. Also, it doesn't seem to be a conceptual analytic problem, because if it's an analytic problem, as also Tichý thought in the end of his paper, it could be solved in this way, like a mathematical problem. If it's not is neither of these two cases, so what's the third option?
Like Tichý analyzed Anselm as doing exactly that. Like nominally there is like 1,000 and plus one proofs of existence of God. And what's interesting about what Tichý has done in this way in 80s, I think, meaning 1980s, is that like people are not really understanding of facet of Anselm's argument of proofs of existence of necessary existence of God. Like a lot of we touched here is present in that case, and if we have time we can go there. This is just drop it into the air. That exactly Tichý thought that if we look at how Anselm is providing it using the framework of rows, then it seems that Anselm's point is valid, and then he goes on to question, okay, maybe it's not sound, etc. But it was allowed by him looking at the concept of God through his framework, and he has his pros and in his cons.
Just to maybe it's helpful to recall the argument and very shortly. As Milos mentioned, the argument from Anselm say that God is the entity that have any perfection, right? By definition. And so it's almighty.
Like if it's good to have whatever God is, he, she, it has it.
He has it. And according to him, as at least a presupposition, is that existence is one property of this kind.
Yeah.
And something that has this exactly the same property as God, but without existence, is less perfect than God.
Like Ansel will answer Hamlet like to be.
Yeah. And this thesis was argument was endorsed by Descartes, very famous, and Kant rightly disentangle this argument by showing that again existence is not a property like others that you can sum to the other properties, and so for that reason is not sound argument, as we already mentioned.
Yeah.
But his analysis is kind of different. He changed the topic. Like he's aware about the problems of existence as individual property. So let's not read that argument this way, that like it's about individuals. And what Tichý brings to the table is like, let's read it as statements about the offices.
Okay.
That we started
And
with.
which we kind of naturally went into right away from the get-go. If you read that way, his point of Tichy's paper and also of Maria Dushi's paper in 2011, look it up if you wanna. Something. I suggest going to Maria Dushi's page. It's not that hard. She has a long list of publications. It's one of them, so check all of them out. And she went on her ways to try to present Tichy's idea, even because Tichý was a great thinker, but not always written as easily. He wasn't as readable always, but his arguments are interesting. And he changed the focus or explanation of Anselm proof to be about the orders, the offices, and then it seems to be for him, and all the results of that paper or that line of investigation seems to be what he's saying seems to be valid argumentatively, but maybe it's not sound, and it's different kind of problem than Descartes' analysis. Just to
and now, since we've been going on for a long time, can you finally answer the question
you are asking a philosopher, man.
that we begin with, basically about difference between unicorn.
Okay.
I was really happy when you struck that chord. It was like, yeah, now we have a jam. It's because like to be personal, it was a long time ago. I read this paper, which I suggest to read anybody interested in this kind of debate, or let's say in religious analysis of religion context, and it's called I don't know if it's the literal name, but it's on unicorn atheism.
I don't know this.
And it's sorry to the author. I read it several years ago, and it really gripped me, and it was really to the point. It was really going, and it's like unicorn agnosticism actually, I think. Sorry if I'm wrong about it, but the idea is that the author of the paper tried to present the idea that even agnosticism, if played correctly, is more atheism, because either you as agnosticism, if you are speaking, I don't know what X is or what X is about, to be to have a meaning to your statement, all of its parts shall have a meaning. So you are using the word already. So you are not literally standing in your own position you are claiming to have. So if a god, let's just move it forward, like if a god is not a one thing but let's say a kind, like even for polytheistic or religions, there is not just one god, but there is gods. Like you can think about, you can divide things among godish or gods and non-gods. So, and he asked a question. Okay, well, by the way, what is it to be a god with little g there? Like, what's the property being godlike here? And he said, for me, it's a question of is it to be a unicorn? or was it to be a Pegasi? It's like it plays a trick on you. It seems like you understand it, but if you ask yourself what is it to be there, then it's a winged horse. Okay, so if I put a wing on a horse, for example, in some Mengelian way, did I make a Pegasi? No. And you can go on. Or what's a unicorn? It's a horse with a horn, a mythical horse, white horse. Okay, so then if I buy a horse, buy a white color and buy some horn and put it on the. Did I make a unicorn? Probably you say no. If you say yes, you are playing different kind of.
Actually, Pablo Escobar did something like this.
So if you say that no, then you are kind of you have to pose what are the necessary and sufficient conditions of being a unicorn, and nobody knows this. This is the claim, and as a consequence of this, it's not a properly defined kind term. Like, therefore, we shall not use the word unicorn in science.
Yeah.
Put it this way.
To go back in the case that is not a natural kind.
And analogically, if you want to be proper agnostic or atheist, I will kill myself not to remember if it's unicorn, atheism, or agnosticism.
No, I actually found it. It's Unicorn Agnosticism
that's
by Taylor and Francis.
But actually, this is a Kripke position.
Yeah, like he's not like making something new. He just connect, like, if you agree with this line of argumentation with unicorns, gods is another kind you can like analyze like this, and maybe it's the best proper way to be agnostic.
It was by Yuval Avnur. So this is the author.
I don't remember the name, but you can if the arguments apply, it shall applies also to the gods with little g as a kind.
That
so
was my point too. Sure.
It's connected.
Very nice, very nice. I don't know if you have any additional points to make or to add something to this discussion, because
a lot actually.
or maybe
we
not.
We hope a lot,
because we've been going on for hour and a half now.
Wow.
So we want to like wrap it up, sum it up.
Maybe we
put
should
it on
be
the board.
wrapping up already. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe we
that's
can.
tricky, but how can
Because from my point of view, we kind of barely touched on.
Yeah,
what we
actually,
do.
it was nice discussion. I really like it.
Like what we barely touch is what we provided. Like what we try to put it on the map. What we do.
No, maybe just worth mentioning that about this project, just practical stuff. About this project, we are organizing a conference soon on this topic, and will be on in the end of June, with some important keynotes by the speakers and also us. And
if you are interested, check out the metaphysics.sk. So there are information, you can check it out.
So we have our own webpage.
And also we have
that I don't remember actually the name.
Divine names.
Divine names.
Divine names. I think also SK, right?
Yeah, maybe if we post it somewhere, this information can be checked out around us. So please do. That's a good idea.
Yeah, it's www.divinenames.sk. You can find there all the information and also the team who is working there on this project, and what are the events or publications, and contact, of course. So
yeah, there have been. I'm happy to say that there have been results provided. Like people, not that we solved the problem of God.
That's not be.
That we will be probably not making podcast here. We will be maybe on the street, on the some tribune. But
we'll be in Scientology maybe.
As is usual in science, like we try to move the question forward a bit, and within a framework, tools provided, and try to solve particular problems within this, and try to move the wheels of, let's say, this big machine forward, maybe to make it work better.
No, the point is people usually, these people I met are skeptical about this project because they are skeptical about God or the concept of God, has some prejudice. But I found this also this investigating this kind of stuff that I realized why it was so interesting for philosophers for centuries. This concept, apart if they are believer or
It was
atheist
the
or
biggest
not.
question of
Because
life.
yeah, it was the biggest question ever, but for a reason. Because you can address this
42.
question. Yeah, exactly. You can
42. Again, 42.
you can address this
Answer
question
on
to
everything.
yes from totally from different almost every perspective, and so it enrich you to understand the topic you are discussing, you are investigating independently of God, but it can help you to see from a different
So maybe
perspective.
next time we can delve deeper into these particular frameworks of ours, one
Yeah,
at a
most
time,
most
with
definitely.
let's
Yes.
say
Yes.
experts on the field, people who published, and maybe we provide. We
Yeah.
will be more speaking about how we moved it. Wait for it.
Wonderful. Let's make a next podcast about that exactly and see how it goes.
We have stuff.
Yeah. So that's a wrap, guys. Congratulations. This was a great podcast.
Thank you.
It,
I enjoyed a lot
It,
actually.
it was a really enjoyable talk, and actually for me it was also very interesting because I
didn't fall asleep.
well
There was a risk.
there was a risk, of course, but I actually enjoyed the arguments and also this little bit deeper explanation than the usual stuff. So it was very interesting, and I hope our listeners will enjoy it as well. So yeah.